everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Hope from Home, the show where we bring you conversations of hope from our home to yours. Today, Jermaine speaks with African-American Catholic author Olga Segura about how Catholics should respond to racism. Anne Torres learns how a school principal in British Columbia has been able to keep the school running from his home. And Father Eric Ma of Toronto tells Noel Ocol all about his podcast, Catholic Latte. And of course, they all tell us where they're finding hope from our home to yours.
Hi, Olga. Welcome to Hope from Home.
Hi, Jermaine. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Really appreciate your time. So today, many see Catholics as people who solely attend Mass, receive the Eucharist, attend the occasional function. Can you speak to the importance of the Catholic social justice teachings that make Catholicism especially relevant as people protest against the death of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and countless others? Like, speak to why Catholicism is more than what people just think it is.
Sure. So I think what makes the church's history with activism and the church's teaching so perfect for the moment that we're seeing, not just in America, but across the country, is that the Catholic Church already has the rhetoric for how to talk about these things, right? We have Catholic social teaching, which are principles that include the life and dignity of the human person, being in solidarity with your fellow man, preferential option for the poor and vulnerable. So the church has already given us the tools, so to speak, to be able to talk about what it means to care about your fellow man, what it means to care about life on this planet, right? But I think and I've argued this in many of my pieces, what I think we need now is a kind of reframing of it. Because I think so often when we think about Catholic activism, when we think about what it means to apply these themes to being a better, not just a better Catholic, but a better human being, we often are just thinking about voting or the fight against abortion. We're thinking about all of these things that are a very important part of what it means to be a person in the church and in politics. But I think we need to reframe it so that Catholics, especially white Catholics, start to realize that when we talk about the dignity of human life, we mean that Black Lives Matter. And I think we're starting to see a lot of that reframing because we've been seeing a lot of church leaders who are at the front lines and who are writing and saying, look, Black Lives Matter. That's a part of the gospel. That is what Jesus calls us to do. So I think, one, we already have the tools for it, right? We have the rhetoric, but we need to start reframing that. And I think that we are really starting to see that, especially with a lot of young Catholics who are angered right now.
Why do you think there's been a bit of hesitancy before to engage with that?
I think a lot of it has to do with, one, a lot of people just have these misconceptions about this movement, a lot of misconceptions about the activists involved in it, right? Because we've seen a lot of well-known mainstream media companies who, when they talk about this movement, they want to equate it to things like the KKK or other really hateful movements that have existed in this country. And I think a lot of people have internalized that and they just associate this movement with all of these hateful things, and that's wrong. And I think that that's why now, almost 7 years later, after the movement was born, we have so many people that are finally being like, oh, okay, I'm listening to the people in this movement. I'm listening to Catholics who are showing me how to engage with something that I don't understand and might often fear, but at least I think now people are willing to listen. I think that that's something that, and people have been demanding this for years, even before the Black Lives Matter movement, but I think in 2020, again, I think because of the context of the global pandemic and so many other factors, people are really being fueled and pushed to actually engage with this movement.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you talked about obviously the impact of coronavirus, and there's been a lot of varying fallouts because people are being impacted differently. And then add into the injustice of what happened to George Floyd, and among many others. How can the Catholic Church show it is listening to Catholics of color and make changes inside and outside the church? What are tangible steps that can be taken?
So I think some tangible, immediate steps that we can take is what we're seeing with the bishop from El Paso, right, who was at the front line, who was carrying a sign that very explicitly said Black Lives Matter. I think seeing Catholics, seeing clergy at the lines is the number one way that we can get people to pay attention, because yes, there are a lot of people in the church who, for them, the church, like you mentioned when we started this interview, what it means to be Catholic and what we associate with the Catholic Church. A lot of people don't think about bishops, they don't think about church leaders because they do a lot of local activism. But I think an immediately tangible way that we can get involved is by being at the front lines as church, especially white Catholics and white leaders. Two, supporting a lot of the organizations that are bailing people out. You know, we saw the Minnesota Freedom Fund, we saw the Brooklyn Bail Fund, a lot of organizations that are not just bailing people out and providing resources, but a lot of activist organizations that have been doing this work for years. And I think those are the main short-term ways that we can get involved. And I think long-term, we need to think about incorporating anti-racism training into our formation. I think that we need to get Catholics comfortable with being able to say, I have white privilege, what does that mean? This country was built off the backs of Black Americans, what does that mean? And just really forcing people to grapple with that history in this setting of a church, which can provide a sort of safe and affirming space for people to not be afraid to have these uncomfortable conversations. I think incorporating that into formation, I think holding clergy accountable every year, forcing them outside of what we have for lay Catholics, forcing them to really engage and step outside of their own privilege and to really just talk and listen. Because I think that's what it comes down to, listening to communities who for years have been saying that Black Lives Matter, for years have been saying that the church should be better. Listen to the people who know what they're doing. So I think those are a lot of the tangible things that we can start to think of.
Yeah, and that's interesting. Because you're located in America, there's a very specific context there. And in Canada, I know often we will say, "Oh, our history isn't like that." But this definitely is a valuable opportunity for Canadian Catholics also to look at our history and to also look at how we can engage and create more equitable church and really live out those social justice teachings. And really, you know, we're all called to walk like Christ and called to be saints. So this is definitely an opportunity to pivot both south of the border, Canada and beyond. And you know, with all of this turmoil, it's very easy, I think, for people to get lost in despair and to really feel that there nothing can be done. But I don't think so. You know, that's the whole point of Hope from Home. We feel that there is hope in all things, and this is no different.
Right.
For yourself, what is your hope for people as we navigate these turbulent times, and where do you think we go from here?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. I think that my hope is that we continue to see the engagement that we're seeing at the front lines now. I think that this is the first time that I've seen white Catholics and just white Americans in general really sort of publicly acknowledging their white guilt and very publicly saying, like, we have to step up. So that even though I'm dealing with so many awful emotions at once, I'm also really comforted by the fact that I see a lot of fellow white Catholics, I see a lot of fellow Americans who are like, we need to step it up and we need to do the work. And also seeing all of the young Black and brown protesters that I've been seeing in New York City, you know, that makes me really hopeful for our future. I think our faith teaches us that, you know, death is not the end, and we might not see justice in this time, but we can still leave a more just world. And I think just kind of seeing that and seeing all of the young people who are fighting for justice, that really gives me hope. And I think they're our future. I think that the people who every day go out into the Bronx streets, Manhattan streets, Brooklyn streets, despite what's becoming a very scary situation with our police force, they're putting their bodies on the line. And I think that, to me, nothing is more evident of who Jesus was and who Jesus wants us to be than those people. And I think at my darkest moments, I just look at these faces and I'm like, okay, we'll be all right. I might not see it, but people are going to keep fighting. So I think that's the hope that I have for the future.
That's a wonderful hope. Seeing the youth engagement, seeing the church in turn engaging with the youth, because really they're the future of the world, future of the church. So that's a wonderful hope. I wish you well and stay safe between coronavirus and these protests. There is a lot going on, but I feel that your faith and your hope is well placed, and good things can come. So thank you so much for your time.
Sure. Thank you, Jermaine. And you stay safe too.
Thank you.
So I'm happy to be joined by Jason Borkowski, principal at Cloverdale Catholic School for the past 11 years. And so, Jason, being a school principal is nothing new for you, but certainly being a school principal during a pandemic has got to be a brand new experience. To start off, can you walk me through what it was like to have your school closed due to coronavirus? And as a school principal, what was going through your mind, what your reaction was to this massive change?
Well, I think like everybody, it was a bit scary at first. And there's a lot of uncertainty. I think that was kind of the scariest part. We're dealing with not just a new virus, but something that was invisible and unpredictable, especially at first. So like everyone else, I was in a bit of shock. I was a bit scared, and I was definitely disappointed. As a principal, and just generally as a teacher, I like to feel like I have everything planned. And so not being able to do things as usual, do things as planned has been a shock to my system. And I've learned a lot from it, for sure.
Definitely. Actually, my mother's a teacher, and so that having everything planned, I definitely understand that too.
Yeah.
And so how has your role as a Catholic school principal shifted during the pandemic?
Well, it's definitely changed. I like to be the kind of principal who's very involved with the students. So, visiting them at recess, going around to the classrooms, telling stories, comforting them, and, disciplining when necessary. And all of that has just gone out the window with the school closure. So I've seen my role to become one of keeping the community united. And I've tried to do that through our social media presence. So we've increased our use of Facebook. I've been emailing parents regularly, updating the school website, and most importantly, creating a lot of content on YouTube to keep the community connected. So I've been daily having interviews with community members, teachers, superintendents, anyone who's willing to be on my show 5 Minutes With, where they just tell stories and talk about how they're feeling and how they're reacting to everything. I have story time videos for the kids so they can see me, hear my voice, and get a sense of still being connected to the school that way. And as a school community, the staff and I, we got together and made a lot of goofy videos too, including like a Star Wars video. And just today, we released our latest, which is a how school is going to restart video, where a group of teachers dressed up as students, and we walked through the school and showed what it's going to be like, because our schools are reopening on June the 1st.
Wow, that's a lot of stuff. And it's great to hear that you're putting out content for your school community. You mentioned before in a previous conversation that the content's actually getting quite a bit of views and reactions. Can you talk a little bit more about that too?
Yeah, I've been really pleasantly surprised because, we're not a very large school. We have 320 students, about 220 families. So I wasn't expecting a lot when I started putting out the content, but since we've started, there's been tens of thousands of hours worth of minutes watched and about 13,000 views so far on the YouTube channel.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm so happy for you and the school community. And so what has the whole experience been like? What are some big takeaways for you from all of this, especially from a faith perspective?
Well, I think if I go back to what I said earlier about plans, is someone has said to me, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. Realize that our lives are not our own and God's in charge. So it's been difficult to accept all of the changes and all the unpredictability. But what's helped is being able to say, okay, God, it's your school. Please take care of it. I'll do my best, but it's not all under my control. And we just have to trust that God has a plan for everything and it's going to work out. We're going to be okay.
Well, Jason, thank you so much for being on the show and for sharing your experience as a Catholic school principal. I wish you all the best moving forward with the reopenings and whatever you guys do as a school in the future, and God bless.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
Hello, Father Eric Ma. Thanks so much for joining us on today's episode, all the way from Oshawa, Ontario.
Well, happy to be with you.
Your show, Catholic Latte, is really starting to grow in popularity. I'm seeing your face all over social media.
There we go. We try. Noel.
Well, Father Eric, for our viewers around the world who may not have yet heard of Catholic Latte, can you maybe explain to us what the show is and how the idea came?
Right. It's actually kind of misleading because it's called Catholic Latte because I wanted the name Catholic in it, and I was doing like a name search, and I wanted to pick something that wasn't taken, basically, in terms of like YouTube and Facebook and whatever. And so I wanted something that was sounded like it had the word Catholic, but also had something that was sounded non-threatening. And so we picked Latte, which is kind of funny because it has nothing to do with coffee. And so it's just reflections about the spiritual life and whatever. But it's one of those things that I've actually been planning to do for a while. So a lot of people don't know this, but before I became a priest, I was a lawyer. And before I was a lawyer, I actually wanted to be a filmmaker. Oh. And so I remember visiting, going to the Vatican and Rome and stuff, and one of these little mission trips, and meeting John Paul II. And when you sit in the first two rows in the Paul VI hall, you get a chance to meet the Pope. And so here's my moment to talk to the Pope. And so what I said was like, I think I would like to really be a filmmaker to help use the medium of film to help spread the faith. And I don't know what he was thinking. He didn't say anything, but he just looked at me, and I thought maybe he was thinking, yeah, right, buddy, like you're going to be a priest. But I think, maybe it worked out. It worked out anyways, because I'm a priest now. I used to be a lawyer, and now I'm doing films, and as you know, I'm doing a lot of examples in my podcast that involve films. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. Right now, I noticed that you have 5 episodes, and they sometimes range from movie reviews to reflections. What are you hoping to do with the show in the future?
Yeah, well, it's kind of interesting because the original idea was that we would do it to access a greater segment of the population, and so we've been actually planning this for months. And so I got to give kudos to people in the parish, people in the chaplaincy, because besides being pastor at St. Joseph Worker Parish, I'm also chaplain of Ontario Tech Durham College in Trent. And so a lot of people have been working together for, again, the past several months to put this thing together. So whether it's talking about soundproofing the room or getting the equipment or just teaching me how to use this stuff. And so I remember even when the offices were about to be closed in terms of parish offices in the Archdiocese, I called one of our students over and I was just like, look, can you just teach me how to use this stuff because we're going to be in lockdown. And so I need to know how to do this on my own. But the whole idea is that we were planning this for months. And so it's really convenient how it came together. But my thinking was that, when you look at a typical parish setting, let's say for like a typical weekend, you get like 1,000 people. And that's great. It's great, people coming to Mass and attending the Holy Sacrament of the Mass. But at the same time, we recognized that we weren't really accessing a lot of people in terms of getting the word out. So if you think about the meaning of the podcast, a well-constructed podcast can easily get like 3 to 4 times that amount. So recently I did a podcast on Michael Jordan's The Last Dance, that series is out right now on ESPN. Yeah. And that got about 5,000 hits, Wow. And so that was really great. The other thing that's really cool too about this medium is that it accesses a certain demographic, which is typically harder to get in terms of evangelization and mission. And so, for example, when I looked at the YouTube analytics, it's kind of interesting. The demographic I hit the most tends to be 35 to 44, so it's around 80%. And of that, the vast majority, funny enough, are men actually. So you think about that particular age group and the male demographic, typically really hard to access in terms of evangelization and mission. But the fact that we have this medium to reach them, it's pretty awesome.
No, that's great. Now you started off originally with podcasts, right? And then made the transition to video.
Well, actually, we started with video first, and then we made the transition to audio.
Okay.
And so, again, it's a matter of kind of respecting the medium. And so we started with podcasts so we started with YouTube because I want people to see me and hear me as well. But then I always had in the back of my mind that people, wanted to possibly listen to podcasts as they were going about their work and, chopping vegetables in the kitchen or like taking a walk or whatever. And that's turned out to be the case. And so, again, it's one of those situations where you just got to respect the medium. So some people like an in-person thing. Some people like a video where you can see the person. Other people just like to hear you speak as they go about their business.
Okay. Do you think that post-COVID quarantine, that the output that you're producing would be less, or are you sort of forecasting or planning for it to be more?
Yeah, like the way I think of it is it's meant to be a complementary option. And I think that's what you're seeing right now. I mean, the church has always known that there's been an opportunity to really bone up in terms of the new media, in terms of websites and like social media, podcasts and whatever. But it's kind of funny. You see this throughout the tradition of the church. Whenever there's a crisis, people step up. So in a sense of whether Christ raises up saints or like the church comes together to kind of address a particular issue in real time, that's what kind of what you're seeing right now. So people have always known in theory that, okay, we need to really blow up our game in terms of the new media. But now in light of COVID and like the pandemic and lockdown and as such, people are actually doing it. And certainly it's a bit of a learning curve, but the whole idea is that that's really going to serve us well in the future.
Okay, so I'll have to admit I'm a big fan of your movie reviews. So I love movies. I'm really interested. I'm always watching. What movies are you planning to review coming up, or are you just sort of going based on what you're watching?
Yeah, well, it's kind of interesting because I posted some of the movie reviews that I do on Catholic Latte before on Facebook, but it's interesting when you look at the analytics. You see like likes and like comments and this sort of thing, but you also look at the fact that people aren't really reading these things. So it's convenient to have this video option where people can actually watch it, So as people probably know, my favorite movie of all time is Disney's Frozen. And it's one of those things I've been meaning to do a podcast on it eventually in time. But it's one of those things that really summarizes the gist of salvation history in a way which just completely blows my mind. The fact that a movie like that even exists is just crazy, So I've given a homily on the movie Frozen before in a parish context, but I'd like to really do that for the podcast going forward.
That's excellent. Now, Father Eric, I know we're running a little bit out of time, but I just wanted to ask, I'd like to ask all our guests the same question. What gives you hope during this difficult time?
Yeah, I think the thing to do in a situation is to cling to the person of Christ. And I know maybe expect that answer because I'm a priest and stuff, right? But I always think about like John, chapter 6, where the people leave Christ because he says, talking about drinking his blood, eating his body and stuff. And he turns to Peter and says, well, will you also leave, basically? And Peter, of course, says, to whom shall we go, Lord? You have the words of eternal life. And the thing to kind of keep in mind there is that Peter is not a theologian. Like, he doesn't know about transubstantiation, the real presence, and that sort of thing. But the whole thing is that he knows intuitively that in the person of Christ is the way, the truth, and the life. So if I stick with him, even in the midst of darkness, even in the midst of confusion, I'm going to be okay, right? And so for me, it's kind of like that. Like, to use an example, I remember back in the day when I was on my internship year in seminary, so you go to a parish and whatnot. Mm-hmm. I fully expected that year would be a total disaster, but I remember talking to my spiritual director, and he said to me, I hear what you're saying in terms of like the reasons why you might feel apprehensive about the year which is to come, and I understand you're describing in detail your emotional life. But despite those things that you're thinking, despite those things that you're feeling, you have to have a sense of joyful expectation that the Lord will bring about his grace precisely in the midst of this confusing and messy situation. And I think that's an important thing for people to remember, because I think a lot of people, they found their hope on the fact that I understand this or I get that, but it's not about that, right? The whole idea is that there is the Lord, right? And so do you believe everything about the Lord that the church says, right? Like, he is Father, he is Lord, he is on your side. There's not like the good and the evil. Like, there is the Lord who is all good, and he is fully on your side. Do I believe that, and do I entrust my life to that? If you do that, then you can have hope.
Yes, that's a really good point. Thank you so much for sharing that. So really quickly now, as we wrap up, where can our audience go to listen to your podcast and to watch your videos?
Oh yeah, thanks a lot. So basically, the video version is available on Facebook as well as YouTube. If you want an audio version, you can go to Spotify, you can go to iTunes, or you can go to this thing called Podbean. So whatever kind of suits your fancy.
So that would be Catholic Latte. You search Catholic Latte on YouTube and on Spotify and all the other Facebook standard mediums.
Yeah, I think the best way to go would be to go to Facebook or YouTube, unless you don't want to see my face, but in which case you can go to iTunes. That's yeah.
Thanks so much, Father Eric. That's amazing. And I appreciate all the work you've done. And I'm certainly looking forward to all of your upcoming episodes.
Hey, well, thanks for the opportunity, Noel.
And that's all for today. Thank you, Jermaine, for that conversation with Olga Segura. There's so much to process here, but it's true that Catholics should lead the struggle against racism. Also, what did you think of Marianne's conversation with Jason Borkowski? Are you still in school? What things are your principal or school teachers doing to keep students engaged? And how about that Catholic Latte podcast? Do you know any other priests who've started hosting their own podcasts or making videos? Share your comments with us by following Sultan Light Media on all of our social media platforms and commenting with the hashtag #HopeFromHome. If you miss any part of the program and you'd like to watch it again, you can always visit our website, sultanlighttv.org/HopeFromHome. We hope that these stories inspire you to stay positive and remind you that we're all so connected through hope.